I never meant to notice her. Not like this. But there she was, standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning slightly on the frame, and I couldn't stop myself. Her presence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. But it pressed into the air like sunlight through a dusty window, warm and impossible to ignore. She moved with a grace that felt practiced yet effortless, her hand brushing the edge of the counter as if hesitant to fully touch the world around her. She was older, mid-40s, but that only made the pull stronger. There was a confidence in the tilt of her chin, the curve of her shoulder, yet behind it, a subtle softness, a trace of vulnerability I couldn't name. I, 23 and far too aware of everything, felt my pulse in the small of my throat. Watching her was like listening to music I didn't know I remembered. She smiled, just a tilt of the lips, and for a fraction of a second, our eyes locked. My hand, resting casually on the fridge handle, tingled at the imaginary warmth of hers against mine. A brush of knuckles, a hesitation, a heartbeat stretched into eternity. The room smelled faintly of brewed coffee, vanilla, and something uniquely hers. Something that made me want to close my eyes and inhale just one more second. She laughed quietly at a joke I wasn't sure I'd made out loud, and the sound shivered through me. Her gaze lingered too long, not in accusation, not in expectation, but in a quiet acknowledgement, like she'd noticed my noticing her. I wanted to speak, but words tangled in my mouth. I wanted to move closer, but my feet rooted themselves to the linoleum floor. Instead, I just watched. The way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee mug, the slight tremor in her hand when she caught herself humming under her breath. Every small gesture pulled me deeper, a tide I wasn't prepared to fight. She turned, walking past me to the window, and the faint brush of her elbow against my arm was electric, lingering long enough to make me aware of the space I'd never known could feel so charged. I swallowed. She didn't look back, but I could feel her attention like heat on my skin. And then, just as the silence settled between us like a soft, shared secret, the front door creaked. Someone was coming in or maybe going out, I didn't know. My heart jerked. Her head tilted slightly toward the sound, and our proximity, once a slow burn, became a spark threatening to ignite. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked to mine. That glance, unspoken, heavy, teasing, made me certain of something I wasn't ready to name. And yet I couldn't look away. The moment shattered when a text pinged on my phone. I didn't check it immediately. Instead, I watched her shoulders stiffen for a fraction of a second. And in that instant, everything shifted, like the air had remembered something it hadn't yet told me. And then the door opened fully, letting in someone I knew, or maybe didn't. And the charged, quiet world we'd built between us teetered on the edge of revelation. I realized, with a hollow sort of thrill, that nothing would ever feel the same again. I never thought about her this way before. At least, I told myself I hadn't. But now, sitting across from her at the small cafe table, I felt it in every quiet, measured motion. The way her fingers curled around her teacup, the way her eyes flicked up to mine and lingered just long enough to make my chest tighten. She was deliberate, careful, yet teasingly close, as if she knew exactly the effect she had but wouldn't let herself give in. I'd always been restless, moving from one fleeting thing to another, never letting anyone in too deeply. And she, graceful, confident, mid-40s, had a life full of layers I couldn't yet read. She carried a history in her posture, in the faint crease near her eyes when she smiled, in the slight hesitation when she reached for a plate before thinking better of it. There was loneliness there, but not the desperate kind. More like a quiet, well-tended ache that refused to vanish completely. Our attraction should have been impossible, taboo even. She was my girlfriend's sister, and the age gap, her in her 40s, me barely into my 20s, made every glance, every accidental brush of hands feel like stepping over an invisible line I couldn't see until I'd crossed it. And yet, the risk somehow made the tension sweeter, more urgent. When she leaned forward to point at something on the menu, her shoulder grazed mine. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly looked away, pretending to study the list, but I could feel her breath, warm and faint, against the side of my neck. I wanted to turn and watch her lips move, to hear her voice without pretense. But I didn't. Couldn't. Not yet. She caught me staring anyway, a half-smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't teasing exactly, but there was a recognition there, a quiet acknowledgement that we both understood what we weren't saying. She leaned back slightly, giving herself space, and the absence was almost as electric as her presence. Every brush of her hand, every shift closer, was a question I couldn't answer, a pull I couldn't resist. I remembered snippets she'd let slip before, hints of past regrets, a marriage that had ended quietly, friendships that had frayed. The vulnerability didn't make her weak. It made her human, alive, real. And I was aware of every tremor of her fingers, every glance that lingered longer than polite distance allowed. I wanted to close the gap, but I also wanted to wait to see if she would meet me halfway. Then, without speaking, she reached across the table, just enough for her fingers to brush against mine as she moved a sugar packet. The contact was brief, seemingly casual, but the world shrank around it. I felt it in my chest, in the subtle tightening of my hands, in the sudden awareness of the warmth radiating from her. A silence followed, neither of us daring to fill it, yet it spoke louder than any words could. It was the kind of moment that could have been ordinary, insignificant. But with her, nothing ever felt ordinary. And in that pause, in the quiet electricity hovering between us, I knew, without a doubt, that nothing would remain the same. I felt her presence before I saw her step into the room. The way she leaned against the doorway, shoulder brushing the frame, sent a shiver down my spine I couldn't hide. We were alone, or we thought we were, until the faint buzz of a phone startled us both. I glanced down. A message from my girlfriend blinked insistently. My stomach dropped. She noticed the change immediately. Her hand hovered near mine on the table, fingertips brushing ever so slightly. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet my body remembered it long after. I wanted to pull back, to ignore the pull, but instead I inched closer without meaning to. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching, with a softness that made me ache and a challenge that made me hesitate. The risk was tangible. What if someone walked in? What if a notification revealed too much? Every rational thought screamed to step away, but every impulse urged me to linger. Her proximity filled the small space, warm and intoxicating, the faint scent of her perfume catching in my chest and leaving me breathless. We sat with the silence stretching between us. Her hand hovered near mine again, this time on purpose, fingers brushing against mine deliberately, but then retreating just slightly, testing the limit. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to feel her lips against mine, but fear of guilt, of consequences, kept me anchored to my restraint. Yet restraint felt more impossible than surrender. A laugh echoed from the hallway, a reminder that we weren't alone in the world. She stiffened almost imperceptibly, and I mirrored the tension, the shared awareness of danger and desire intermingling. Our glances were short, sharp, and full of unspoken questions. Every heartbeat felt like it might betray us both. I noticed the subtle tremor in her fingers, the slight parting of her lips, the way her breath hitched just before she spoke. Each small movement was a confession without words, a promise I wasn't sure either of us was ready to claim. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but my voice wouldn't form. Instead, we communicated in glances, in pauses, in the micro-behaviors that said everything we couldn't. And then, somehow, we were closer than before. Her arm brushed against mine as she leaned forward to retrieve a book, and the accidental closeness became deliberate. My chest pressed lightly against hers, and I felt her inhale sharply, a quiet acknowledgement of the tension. We froze in that half-embrace, knowing the line we were approaching, feeling the magnetic pull neither of us could resist. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of us, hearts hammering, breaths shallow, fingers brushing again and again in silent rhythm. The almost kiss hovered between us, teasing and tantalizing, electric and forbidden. And though both of us tried to resist, the space between us shrank, just a whisper of air left, until our bodies acknowledged what our minds refused to name. I knew then that when we finally crossed the line, if we ever did, it would change everything. But for now, even in restraint, even in hesitation, we had never been closer. The rain had started softly outside, tapping against the window like it was eavesdropping on us. I didn't notice at first, too focused on the way she leaned just slightly closer than before, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that felt deliberate. Every small movement was magnified, the subtle scent of her hair, the warmth radiating from her skin, the soft rise and fall of her chest. I couldn't stop myself from noticing, from wanting, from the way my hand itched to reach out, to trace the line of her jaw, to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. And then I did, hesitant, trembling fingers brushing against her temple, and she didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes softened, a quiet vulnerability mirrored in mine. "I shouldn't," I whispered, voice low, almost drowned by the patter of rain. The words trailed off, unfinished, because they carried more than just caution. They carried longing, regret, desire. Her hand found mine without thought, squeezing gently as if to anchor herself, or maybe me. I felt the electricity shoot through my veins, a jolt that made every rational thought flee. We were inches apart, suspended in a moment that shouldn't exist but somehow did. Her lips were only a breath away, and I could hear her inhale, feel her pulse thrum beneath my fingertips. "You're different," she said softly, and it wasn't just an observation. There was confession there, raw and trembling. "You make me, I don't know, feel things I thought I'd left behind." I swallowed, my throat dry, heart hammering. I wanted to tell her everything all at once. I wanted to admit the way I'd been thinking about her for weeks, the way my body remembered her touch before it happened, the way my mind spun in circles whenever she was near. But the words dissolved before they formed. She leaned even closer, the warmth of her shoulder pressing into mine, her hair brushing against my cheek. The room shrank to just the two of us, the storm outside fading to background noise. My hand rose, hesitated, hovered near the curve of her neck. Every instinct in me screamed to cross the line, to close the distance, to taste the moment. But I stopped, frozen by fear, by guilt, by the impossibility of what we were about to do. Her eyes searched mine, wide, vulnerable, unflinching, and in them I saw my own reflection. Desire tangled with hesitation, longing tangled with fear. And yet, in that gaze there was permission, a challenge, a surrender I wasn't sure I deserved. And then, just as my lips hovered near hers, the phone buzzed again, sharp and intrusive, shattering the fragile world we'd built. Her head jerked slightly, breaking the connection, but her hand stayed in mine. The electricity lingered, humming between us, waiting, suspended. For a heartbeat, we were closer than ever, and I knew, whatever happened next, nothing could be the same. I thought the tension had reached its peak. I thought we had mastered restraint, balancing desire and fear on a knife's edge. But then her phone lit up, and everything shifted. A message she hadn't meant for me, just barely glimpsed, revealed a truth I hadn't been prepared for. She knew how dangerous this was, and yet, she'd been entertaining it all along. Her gaze flicked up at me, caught me in a way that felt both intimate and accusatory. Her words stumbled, unfinished, but her fingers lingered near mine, brushing slightly as if testing whether I'd flinch. I didn't. My hand stayed where it had been, hovering, trembling, but willing. The revelation hit like ice in my chest. Every glance, every brush of skin, every stolen moment suddenly carried a weight I hadn't fully felt before. It was no longer a private tension. It was a secret shared, dangerous in its intimacy. I wanted to step back, to retreat to safety, but every instinct in me refused. The magnetic pull between us only intensified. "I've been thinking about you," she admitted finally, voice low, almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the storm outside. Her eyes searched mine, flickering with vulnerability and defiance. Her hand brushed against my arm again. Not by accident this time, but when I tried to speak, the words caught, stuck behind the weight of reality and desire. I felt my chest tighten, My pulse thundered in my ears. The distance between us seemed impossibly small, yet every inch was lined with peril. I wanted to lean forward, close the space entirely, feel the curve of her lips, the warmth of her skin, but guilt, fear, and the unspoken consequences pressed down on me like a physical force. And yet, she leaned in, almost daring me to respond. Her shoulder brushed mine as she shifted closer, the faint scent of her perfume curling around me, intoxicating, overwhelming. My fingers itched to touch her, but I froze, the tension thrumming through us, electric and unbearable. I realized, in that suspended moment, that our connection had irrevocably changed. Nothing was safe anymore. Every glance was loaded, every gesture a question we both wanted, and feared, to answer. Her vulnerability, the admission of feelings she hadn't confessed until now, made my body betray my mind. I wanted her in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before, and the awareness of the risk made the desire sharper, more urgent. She stepped closer again, and this time, the brush of her hand along mine lingered longer. I inhaled sharply, caught between surrender and restraint, fear and longing. The storm outside mirrored the chaos building inside me. And then she whispered, barely audible, "Are we going to do this?" The words hung in the air, dangerous, intimate, undeniable. I could feel her breath on my cheek, the faint tremor in her hand. My heart slammed against my ribs. Every rational thought told me no, but everything in me screamed yes. And in that suspended instant, the choice was no longer abstract. It was now. The storm outside had grown louder, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows, but inside, the world had shrunk to just the two of us. Every sound, every breath, every subtle shift in posture was magnified, electric. She was mere inches away, her shoulder brushing mine, her hair curling against my cheek, and I felt the gravity of her presence like a physical weight. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," she whispered, voice low, trembling just slightly. Her hand hovered near mine, then found it, fingers lacing together, tentative yet determined. My pulse raced, every rational thought evaporating in the heat of the moment. I wanted to speak, to say something clever, something that might justify stepping back, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I leaned in just a fraction, feeling the warmth of her breath mingle with mine. Her eyes searched mine, unguarded, raw, full of a vulnerability that matched my own. The temptation was unbearable. Every instinct told me to close the remaining space, to bridge the distance that had stretched between us for weeks, to feel the connection we'd built in every glance, every brush of hands, every stolen moment. And yet, the knowledge of what was at stake, the family ties, the age gap, the consequences, pressed against me. But pressing harder than caution was desire, messy and insistent, demanding acknowledgement. She lifted a hand, brushing hair from my forehead, a gesture that felt intimate, unspoken, a question and an answer at once. "Do you?" Her voice trailed off, and I understood without her finishing the sentence. "Do I let this happen? Do I let us happen?" I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the scent of her, the faint warmth that radiated from her skin. When I opened them, I saw only her, saw the way her lips trembled, the way her eyes flickered with fear and longing intertwined. I couldn't step back. I couldn't wait any longer. So I leaned in, slowly, deliberately, our foreheads almost touched, breaths mingling, hearts hammering in a rhythm that matched the storm outside. I could feel every curve, every line, every small imperfection that made her entirely human and entirely irresistible. She mirrored me, leaning just as close, eyes half closed, lips parted in a silent invitation. The tension that had bound us for weeks, the glances, the silences, the near confessions, collapsed into this single, suspended heartbeat. I rested my hand lightly on her neck, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and she shivered, pressing slightly closer, acknowledging the pull that neither of us could deny. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just us, breathing, trembling, aware of every inch of space between us and every danger it carried. And then, finally, clarity. We both understood. We understood the risk. We understood the longing. We understood each other fully for the first time, without pretension, without restraint. And in that understanding, the tension didn't vanish. It transformed into trust, into inevitability, into the unspoken acknowledgement that whatever happened next, we were together in this storm, in this moment, in this messy human connection we'd been circling all along. The storm had passed. Outside, the world was quiet again, washed clean, the rain leaving streaks along the windows that caught the fading light. Inside, we finally allowed ourselves to breathe. Not the quick, jagged breaths of anticipation, but slow, measured ones, as if the weight we'd carried for weeks had finally lifted. She sat beside me on the couch, our shoulders touching naturally, comfortably. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining without hesitation, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the room. It was quieter than desire, steadier than longing, a feeling that could survive the storm, the risks, the doubts. I didn't know how long I could wait, I admitted, voice low, almost a whisper, afraid to break the fragile calm. She squeezed my hand gently, eyes soft, reassuring, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. I was scared too, she said, leaning just slightly against me, letting her head rest near mine. Her hair brushed my cheek, faint and familiar, a reminder of every fleeting brush, every stolen glance that had led us here. But I wanted this. I wanted us. The words settled over us like sunlight, warm and grounding. There were still risks, still questions about what others might think, but those worries felt distant now, unimportant against the reality of the moment. She breathed against my shoulder, and I felt it, the quiet certainty that this connection, fragile and impossible as it had seemed, was ours to keep. We stayed like that for a long time. No grand declarations, no sudden bursts of drama. Just the simple human intimacy of two people who had waited too long and finally allowed themselves to be present with one another. Her hand on mine, her head against me, my arm around her shoulder. The kind of closeness that didn't need words. At some point, almost imperceptibly, she pressed her forehead against mine. I felt the slight tremor in her hand, mirrored by my own tightening grip. A laugh escaped me, soft and incredulous, and she chuckled too, a quiet, shared sound that made the tension of the past weeks dissolve completely. I guess we've crossed the line, I said, teasing lightly, but the undercurrent was real. We had risked everything and found something worth it. She pressed a gentle kiss to my temple, a promise, a seal, a quiet acknowledgement that nothing had to be perfect to be real. For the first time, I felt entirely seen. Not just desired, not just noticed, but truly seen, and it was enough. Enough to stay, enough to trust, enough to begin what neither of us could have predicted but both had wanted. The world outside continued its calm rhythm, but inside, a new story had begun. One built on honesty, risk, intimacy, and the messy, beautiful truth of human connection. We stayed close, hand in hand, foreheads pressed together, letting the quiet settle around us like a gentle embrace. And I knew, without question, that we were finally exactly where we were meant to be. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?